Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. Today we're doing a bonus episode, an update in our series, checking in with previous guests and what they've been up to. So today we are joined by Ellen Patnaude, who is our guest in episode 141, February 2022. I can't believe it's been that long, but it's great to have you back here. Ellen, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I also cannot believe that it's already been over 2 years
Mhm.
since we did that episode.
So there's a lot to catch up on. For one, you've got a new company name, if you want to tell everyone about that.
Yeah, so I made a decision last year in 2023 to rebrand because my original brand of lead quine was tied to the programs we developed using horses. And COVID sort of took that dream away, and
Mm.
we were a little slow to accept it. And
Mhm.
rebranding to my name gave me more recognition. It was easier for people to realize they'd found the right spot.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we made that switch last fall.
Yeah, so
So now it's
Patnaude Coaching.
Patnaude Coaching. Yes, it's the new
And I
brand.
made a little mistake. Pat, I feel I'm saying your last name a little bit incorrectly, which is an embarrassing mistake on my part. I apologize.
It is fine.
I've probably said it wrong the whole time I've known you since we were in high school.
It's possible, but it's okay. It's a common thing. But yeah, it's a French Canadian name, so it's pronounced Patnaude.
Patnaude. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, so Ellen has written, so we've talked to some other guests who've written one book, which is an accomplishment. Ellen's written two, because when we talked in 2022, you were working on the first one. So maybe tell us about that book, because that book was very tightly connected to the theme of your episode and the story you shared.
Yes, it was. So that book came out in the fall of 2022. It's called I Thought You Knew: Confessions of a Chronic Assumer. And it's a collection of stories about ways in which I have gotten this all wrong over a lifetime. It's based on 30 years of professional experience of making a lot of assumptions and personal experience. So some of the stories in the book feature interactions with my family. Some of it is based in early work experience. Some, excuse me, some is based in more recent work experience because the goal is not to completely eliminate assumptions. It's not possible. It's part of
Mhm.
human nature.
Mhm.
The goal is really just to become more aware of when we're doing it and when those assumptions become disruptive
Yeah.
to effective communication. So, yep, that came out in the fall of 2022.
Yeah, congratulations on that. I thought you knew, and makes me think you thought I knew how to say your last name. I'm going to stop dwelling on that. Yeah, you're right. That's an interesting point about yeah, how we make assumptions. And I agree with you. It's helpful to call them out. Like, do we know something or are we assuming? Like, I think that's really helpful in business. And if something is an assumption, let's go and test that assumption. What-
Yeah, I was with a group actually a couple of days ago or yesterday, doing a workshop about this. And the conversation was interesting. People recognized that some of us have the tendency to get a little bit of information
Mhm.
and assume that we know the whole story or assume that we know the direction someone is going in. And it really requires some intentional effort to just sit back for a second and ask another question or two to make sure that you understand the intent of the other person's question or statement so
Mhm.
that you can more effectively navigate that interaction to a successful conclusion. But assumptions really are kind of the underlying reason for the breakdown of every single kind of conversation or conflict that I know about. I'm sure there must be an exception, but I haven't found it yet.
Mhm.
There seems to be an assumption of some sort at the bottom of the story behind why something has not gone well.
Mm.
So they're very pervasive, and because of that, they're sometimes hard to recognize when
Mhm.
we're making them. But with a little intentional effort and increased energy focused on self-awareness, we can all get there and move the needle.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the first book included some stories, from your life and your family. This new book really does kind of tell more of the whole story of your life. A very different type of book, available now. Tell us about that book, please.
Yeah, so it's really about mostly about the last 4 years of my mother's life. I always had a difficult relationship with my mother. We loved each other fiercely, but we also fought fiercely.
Mhm.
And that started as soon as I started talking. And so we had kind of a combative relationship throughout my life. And when my mother became affected by dementia in her mid seven or like early to mid 70s, we decided we should invite my parents to relocate to live near us on our farm, so that we could help my dad and support him through his caregiving journey with her. And we were living on this farm that had a carriage house. So that worked out well because they had a space of their own very close to us. Well, the 4 years progressed quickly. We assumed my mother had, talk about assumptions. We
Mm-hmm.
assumed that my mother had Alzheimer's because that was what her mother had had. And that was a 20+ year journey. About a year in, it became pretty clear that she did not have Alzheimer's. We were dealing with something very different. And she ultimately was diagnosed in 2018, about 2 years into noticing the signs. She was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia,
Mm-hmm.
which people may recognize the name of from Robin Williams. He was affected by it. He's the reason we learned you don't use antipsychotics with people who have Lewy body dementia and a history of depression because it can cause those suicidal tendencies, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So my mother, her battle with it was fast and furious. She passed away at the end of 2020, and I navigated that experience to the best of my ability, but often very imperfectly. And because of the nature of our relationship and because of the nature of Lewy body and how much lucidity it offers the person going through it, I felt and was reminded often by her that I wasn't doing things right. I just couldn't do anything right. And I looked and looked and looked for another story that would make me feel less alone in that process. And I just couldn't find one. So 2 years after she passed away, as that first book was launching, I felt I was really grieving so much, so deeply still. And I thought, well, maybe if I write about my experience, I can write the book I needed to read when
Mm-hmm.
I was going through it that just gives a more raw, honest look at the ugly side of what happens or what can happen when you're caregiving and how we navigate it to the best of our ability, but it is far from perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So this book is a memoir. It's called You're Not Doing It Right. Loving my mother
Mm-hmm.
through an unpredictable caregiving journey. It
Mm.
was released on Mother's Day.
Oh, that's nice.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it's now available on Amazon and any place you enjoy finding books, as well as on my website.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a labor of love. I really hope we can change the narrative around caregiving and make somebody feel less alone. That's my goal.
Mm. That's really nice. That well, I'm sure, yeah, like you say, you're writing it, it's helped yourself, I hope, and it's certainly going to help others. The phrase "you're doing it wrong" sort of implies your mother was pointing out mistakes or just things she didn't like, in her
She was
judgment anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think that was very much it. She was, one of the reasons we fought so fiercely my whole life is because she was very controlling and it was rooted in a lot of fear I now understand, but I didn't understand that in the middle of it. But she was so worried that I was going to make some major stumble in my life that would harm me in some way. And so she was very controlling. So she had very specific ideas about how she thought things ought to be done.
Mhm.
And there's a story in the book that tells where the name of this book came from. I'd gone over to her house one day to help her manage some bills because she was losing the ability to do that. And she's rooting around in her desk and she's I'm enough time has passed that I'm starting to wonder if she's forgotten what she was looking for.
Mhm.
And so I asked her if she'd forgotten, but I said it in a little bit of a snarky way.
Uh,
And so she grabbed this pamphlet from the Alzheimer's Association off of her desk
mhm,
and turned around and shook it at me and said, "You're not doing it right." I was
mhm.
like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And she said, "You're not doing it right. This pamphlet says you are supposed to be patient and kind. You're not supposed to yell at me. You're not supposed to get mad at me." And I thought, sister, if you can quote the Alzheimer's brochure to me about how I'm supposed to be communicating with you, I'm feeling skeptical that we're having a bad day. Right.
Yeah,
So that's just one small example of, she was pretty critical, but
yeah,
I know she loved me fiercely
yeah.
and I loved her as well. So this is not meant to be, it's not meant to make her out to be a villain or me.
Mhm,
It's just
mhm,
a very human story of what we
mhm.
went through together.
Yeah, it's just very real.
Hmm.
And I think I said it wrong. You're not doing it right is the title of the book. I kind of
That's
got that
correct. You're not doing it right.
backwards.
Mhm.
You're not doing it right. So Ellen, thank you for sharing about all of that. One other question I've been asking others, kind of along the theme of, we all make mistakes, and you admitted, you told a favorite mistake story before, but I think the corollary is that every book ever published has mistakes because they're created by humans and human editors and human proofreaders. And I don't know, is there any mistake story that comes to mind from either of the books?
Absolutely. And I wish it weren't the case, but here we are.
Yeah. Hmm.
In the first book, near the end where I'm trying to help people understand what else they can do, how else they might be able to connect with me. Everything there is reflective of my old branding.
Hmm.
And so when I rebranded, it meant we had to make sure we were redirecting everything rather than creating new.
Hmm.
And if somebody picks up that book now that's only met me under the new branding, they might be confused
Mm.
by the name Leadquine as
Mhm.
part of my contact information and website and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I learned from that mistake in the first book. And so in this second book, instead of giving that kind of specific direction with names of websites, I created a QR code that I
Mhm.
can adjust over time if
Oh,
need be. So I don't remember what the word is. It's non-static, whatever the
sure.
opposite of that is.
Dynamic.
It's a dynamic, thank you. It's a
Yeah.
dynamic QR code.
Uh-huh.
So if people want more resources, want to see what I'm doing now, want to connect with me, they just have to scan that QR code.
Mhm.
And if my branding ever changes again,
Yeah.
I can update that and it will be more evergreen than the first book.
Yeah. Well, that's a great adjustment and a lesson learned, and that's keeping in the spirit of the podcast here. I think it was a mistake in my most recent book, not throwing in a few QR codes, not to overdo it, but I mean, I use QR codes and I didn't think until after the fact, like, oh, that would have been, I think I saw a QR code in another book. I'm like, oh, it's probably not worth going back and doing again, but for the next time.
There you go for the
So
next time. You'll
thank
learn.
you for sharing the mistake and a good idea. I'm going to it's good reinforcement. So we've been joined today, and I feel like I've been a mistake making machine here along the way. So thank you for your patience with me, Ellen. We've been joined by Ellen Patnaude. A little better. I was in Quebec
You
last
got
week,
it.
so you think I mean, I don't speak French, but you think that would have rolled off the tongue in a more Quebecois sort of way. But Ellen Patnode, I'll put links in the show notes. Um, I don't know if I'll throw a QR code in there. Probably just links, and you'll be able to find Ellen's coaching website, links to the books, and more. So, Ellen, thank you for coming back and giving us all of these updates here today. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to spend time with you, Mark. Thanks for having me back.
Likewise. Thanks.